So we are reading Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins, and we are on chapter 6, page number 103 of the book, and page number Shivangla, page number
20
of the PDF.
Chapter 6, New Horizons in Research. Our concern thus far has been primarily to elucidate the structure of the anatomy of consciousness, with some reference to the mechanisms of force and power. But ours is in no sense a purely theoretical subject. The unique nature of the research method described herein allows exploration of hitherto inaccessible areas of potential knowledge. It is as accessible to the most prosaic practical questions as to the most advanced theoretical explorations. Let us investigate a few general examples.
So what does this mean, right? This testing process you can apply to literally anything, to the most mundane thing you can apply it. For example, you want to test what is the level of consciousness of this book. You can do it. If you're sitting in a car, what is the level of consciousness of the car? Right? You're eating a fruit. What is the level of consciousness of the fruit? So things like that also, right? If you're writing a letter, what is the level of consciousness of the letter? From which state of consciousness is it coming out? What is your level of consciousness when performing a particular act, right? Which is what we just talked about. So the point is that this process can be used for literally anything.
Social problems. Drug and alcohol addiction is a crucial social concern which feeds parallel problems of crime, poverty, and welfare. Addiction has proved an intractable social and clinical problem, thus far not understood beyond the most basic description. By the term addiction, we mean clinical addiction in the classical sense of continued dependence on alcohol or a drug despite serious consequences, a condition exceeding the capacity of the addicted person to discontinue use of the substance unaided because the will itself has been rendered ineffective. But what is the essential nature of addiction? And to what is the addict really addicted?
So now, this is a very important point that is being made here, right? Is the person addicted to the drug, or is the person addicted to the effect that the drug is causing? So are you addicted to smoking, or are you addicted to taking the deep breath which is associated with smoking? Now that becomes the big question over here.
The common belief is that it is the addictive substance itself to which the victim has become addicted because of that substance's power to create a high state of euphoria. But if we re-examine the nature of addiction through the methodology outlined herein, a different formulation of the process emerges. Alcohol or drugs do not in themselves have the power to create. They calibrate at only 100, the level of vegetables, the so-called high that the drug or alcohol user experiences can calibrate from 350 up to 600. The actual effect of drugs is merely to suppress the lower energy fields, thereby allowing the user to experience exclusively the higher ones. It is as though a filter screened out all the lower tones coming from an orchestra, so that all that could be heard were the high notes. The suppression of the low notes does not create the high ones. It merely reveals them.
So basically in yesterday's talk also, he was talking about holotropic breathing, which when you're breathing at that level, it automatically puts you into a high because it disconnects you from what is really there. Your focus of attention goes only on your breath. So everything else gets disconnected. When you're going using the Monroe processes, when you're going into focus 10 or 12, your sensory perception, your physical use of sensory perception or the physical senses start to get turned down. Your mind starts to still. There are no thoughts in your system. So it gives you a high. So over here, what is happening is that you're suppressing the basic conception process of the lower senses.
Within the levels of consciousness, the higher frequencies are extremely powerful, and few people routinely experience these as pure states because they are masked by lower energy fields of anxiety, fear, anger, resentment, etc. Rarely does the average person get to experience, for instance, love without fear or pure joy, much less ecstasy.
So now you're in love with someone. Now there's a constant fear that I will lose her, or I will lose him, or I will lose it, right? So automatically the inverse of what is taking you high will develop. So this is what is being said in the levels of consciousness. When you're really operating at the high level of love, which is above 500, then the fear will not come into the picture at all. But if the fear is coming up, that means you are really operating at the lower levels of consciousness and not at the higher levels of consciousness. Because at the higher levels, all the things that put you on the left side of the grid cannot sustain themselves. They will automatically drop. So most people do not experience the purity of the higher states of consciousness because they are connected with the lower levels of consciousness.
But these higher states are so powerful that once experienced, they are never forgotten and are sought ever after.
So again, this becomes important. And this is something that we keep saying in the workshops also, that once you have experienced a state of consciousness, then that becomes real for you because it is your experience. Now, how much ever someone else may tell you that that is not true, but it is your experience. So you will always hang on to it. And then when you experience that high, you will constantly want to go into that high. So a basic question that we ask in most of the excursion workshops when people experience focus 10, we'll ask them, did you want to come back? Let me tell you, 80 to 90% of the people say we didn't want to come back. Then when they experience focus 12, they say the same thing. Then when they experience focus 15, they'll say the same thing. When they experience focus 21, they'll say the same thing. But now since I've experienced focus 21, focus 10 becomes like normal. Why? Because I've experienced a higher state of consciousness. Now, what do I aspire for? I don't aspire for focus 10 anymore. I aspire for focus 21. And those people who've experienced 27, they want to aspire for that level of consciousness. Now, 21 becomes mundane for them. So like that, the higher the state of consciousness that we experience, the higher the set point that we make for ourselves. Yes, Mukul Bhavi.
I was just going to say that focus 27 is what I want to be there, always at.
Exactly. Because you've experienced it, you want to be there, right? Yeah. Now, focus 10 and 12 is like normal for you. Yeah. Why? Because you've experienced that higher state of consciousness. Yeah. Now, once you've experienced it, you have it. Yeah. It's not that you lose it, right? You'll never forget it because what you experience there is right in front of you, whether you like it or not. And it's the same with me. What I experienced in 27 is constantly playing around in front of me, let me tell you. So it's when someone experiences that now, by Lord's grace, we've got permission to do Lifeline again. So we are going to go to 27 soon.
Cool. We'll do it again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But these higher states are so powerful that once experienced, they are never forgotten and are sought ever after. It is to this experience of higher states that people become addicted. A good illustration is presented in the classic movie Lost Horizon. Shangri-La, the movie's metaphor for unconditional love and beauty, calibrates as a concept at 600. Once experienced, it reprograms the experiencer so that he is never content with ordinary consciousness again. The hero of the movie discovers this fact when he is unable to find happiness again in the ordinary world after returning from Shangri-La. He then gives up everything in order to seek out and return to that state of consciousness, spending years in a struggle which almost cost him his life to find Shangri-La again.
So again, once you experience that state, you want to experience it again, right? So that is what you get addicted to. Now, when you have alcohol, it stuns the mind, it quietens the mind, it closes it, right? But it stops your sensory perception. So because of that, you get a high, but that is not a true high, right? When you really experience that purity of the high without the state of alcohol, that purity is much more serene than what you experience using drugs. The same thing used to happen when people were having LSD, right? They used to go into such euphoric forms, their sense of perception used to go up. They were seeing colors, lights, their brain function started to work well. But when they came down, then it started to create problems for them. So when we use a spiritual process to experience these states of consciousness, they have a purity, they have a finesse to them, which is not there when you use certain other methods of achieving that. And then once you've achieved it, you want to experience it again and again.
Bhaiya, can I ask you something?
Yeah, of course.
So we had one lecture from, I don't know, quite a few months back at that 9:15, where they said they used to use a particular drug.
Yeah, so we had a talk on ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca.
Right. So ayahuasca is a plant medicine where the active, yeah, so listen, the active ingredient is something called DMT, right? I don't know the full form of DMT, dimetric something it is. And that is something which is created in your brain when you go into these euphoric states, right?
So that also you're not at your actual higher level.
So, yeah. So ultimately what is there? The plant medicine is taking you there, right? Yes. Now that is making you experience that state. But to get to that state without the plant medicine at times can become a problem. Okay. And as he was correctly saying yesterday, when you have a drug, you are in the control of the drug. So that is the beauty of maybe the shamanic process where they don't use. Ayahuasca is also a shamanic process, right? But when you're using percussion, when you're using different ways of journeying in shamanism, right? Or when we are using the Monroe techniques, it makes the states of consciousness more stable. Like now, today you're sitting here right now. If I tell you, okay, go to focus 10, can you do it?
Yeah.
You can do it. See, I got a clear answer now that you can do it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
Because you've experienced that state, you've got an encoding to get into that state. Now you can do it at will. You don't need anything else.
Yeah.
Today, if I want to go to 21, I have an encoding for 21. I'll go to 21 like that. But if I'm using a drug, then I can't get to that state without the drug, without that support. So that's the beauty of these processes. How do I get into that state of consciousness without the support of anything? And when I have the ability to do that, it becomes more stable for me.
But then ayahuasca also is not good that these people you used to use.
So ayahuasca causes a lot of purging. So whatever I have heard of ayahuasca, it's in my bucket list. I'm going to do it once at least to get the experience. But the point here is that it causes a lot of purging. So the stuff which is stuck inside, the stories I hear is that people vomit and, they let out, They can shit their pants and all that stuff starts to happen because it causes you to release a lot of stuff. And that is the basic benefit. It causes a purging, which is the basic benefit of ayahuasca. And when you purge everything that is holding you back, then you start to fly. Basically, that's the game, in my view, of what ayahuasca is all about.
Okay.
So now if you have nothing left, really nothing to purge, then you're not going to really experience the vomiting and all that stuff. So if you are holding a lot of stuff back, then you will purge.
So I just want to share something. I watched one of these series on the British nobility, the royalty. And Lady Diana, she used to do this a lot because she was unhappy in her marriage and she used to purge. She's just constantly vomiting, taking something.
That is a different disease. That is something they call it bilmoria or something like that. Anorexia. That basically what happens is that they eat and they want to control their weight. So they want the pleasure of eating, but they don't want the food to remain in, so they vomit it out.
So in this case, they did not make that clear. It was as if there was some substance that she was eating and then purging out, vomiting it out because...
No, so she was having... You're talking about crown, right?
Yeah.
She was doing it to remain like that.
Remain thin. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And then what happens is, since you're doing it so many times that you can't keep the food down only, then it starts happening on its own because now it's become a habit.
Yeah. Okay.
So as soon as you eat, you've created a trigger, the Pavlov effect, the drooling of the dogs because the bell rings. Right. So as soon as you eat, you have to go and purge it. Now that becomes a problem.
Okay. I'm sure it becomes automatic also. You don't even have to put the effort.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that it became automatic.
The same reprogramming process occurs in people who have reached high states of consciousness by other means, such as the experience of samadhi through meditation or near-death experiences. Such individuals are frequently observed to have changed forever. It is not uncommon for them to leave all that the material world represents and become seekers after truth. Many who had transcendental experiences with LSD in the 1960s did the same thing. Such higher states are also or religion, classical music or art, or through the practice of spiritual disciplines.
So again, experiences where what we are doing in the Monroe process, for example. When you're doing shamanic journeying and you go into a real deep state, you go into a really high state of consciousness. When you've had an out-of-body experience or a near-death experience, it can really create shifts in the way that you look at things. It can change the perspective with which you are dealing with stuff. It shifts your entire state of being, right? And that's the reason why when you start associating with people who are at a higher level of consciousness than you, it starts to technically rub off on you. So that's why we need to watch the company that we also keep, right? So once we've experienced that high state, we want to go into that state. We'll enjoy that state. And this is something that all people who've attended the Monroe processes will vouch for, that when they experience the higher state, that is what they aspire to at the end of the day. As Mukul Bhabri has just said, that I aspire to 27 because she had experienced 27. Okay.
The high state which people seek by whatever means is in fact the experience field of their own consciousness, self.
Now, this is very important, right? Now, these higher states that you're experiencing are already a part of you. It's just that you're not consciously aware of it when we are operating with the small guy. The big guy already knows it. So the more we can drop the small guy and start working with the whole, the better off we are as far as achieving higher states of consciousness go. So you need to drop the ego. You need to drop being self-centered. Okay. You need to shift into the states of consciousness which are above 200. We need to get there. That's when the magic really starts to happen. The material world really does not hold the magic. This is something that mystics all over the world have been talking about. The material world is operating at lower states of consciousness. It is not operating above 200.
If they are spiritually unsophisticated and lack a context with which to comprehend the experience, they believe it is created from something out there. That is, a guru, the music, the drug, the lover, etc. All that has actually happened is that, under special circumstances, they have experienced what is in reality in here.
Beautifully put, right? So when we do the OBE program that we are doing, that William Bullman takes us through, he says this very, very clearly, that we term it an out-of-body experience, but is actually an in-body experience. We are going deeper into ourselves. So these realities, which we say that they are external, that we are experiencing it out there, is actually an inward experience. Everything is in us. The only thing is that we need to start becoming aware of it. Nothing more than that.
The majority of people are so divorced from their own states of pure consciousness that they do not recognize them when they experience them, because they identify with their lower ego states, with their own lowest common denominator.
So now this is again very important. So we keep saying that when you want to get to wisdom, you have the knowledge or the information and you have the experience, right? Now, certain times are there when people experience something, but they have no context in which to understand their experience. So then it falls flat. I have the knowledge, but I do not know what an experience is. Again, it falls flat in its face. So he's saying very clear that people are divorced from their own state of pure consciousness, that they don't recognize them when they experience them. So many people have experiences, but they don't recognize it as a transcendental experience. So it vanishes. It goes out of the system. And what do they identify with? The material world, which are all the lower states of consciousness. So when we are attached to something, where do you think it is taking us? It is taking us into a lower state of consciousness. That's why in Vedanta also, over and over and over again, it's constantly repeated: detachment, detachment, detachment. Now, it doesn't mean leave everything. It means do what needs to be done. So work with, do things, be attached to things, but with a base of detachment. So you're attached and detached at the same time. That's where the game really starts working.
A negative self-image blots out the joyous brilliance that is the true essence of their identity, which therefore goes unrecognized. That this joyous, peaceful, fulfilling state is really one's own essence has been a basic tenet of every great spiritual teacher. That is, the kingdom of God is within you.
So all spiritual teachers will say that everything is within you. You have to touch base with it, right? Christ also said, the kingdom of God is within you. You can move mountains, right? What does that imply? That everything is within us. All the power is within us. But because we pay attention to the lower states of consciousness, we are connected with the lower states rather than the higher states of consciousness. So this is why I was telling you all that print this sheet and just keep it there. Because when you keep the sheet in front of you, you will automatically radiate, or you'll automatically, notice, you'll automatically connect to the higher states, because that is your actual state of consciousness. This physical body that we are experiencing here is actually a cover. It is covering that diamond which is inside, right? That is what we need to uncover. We need to get rid of the shaft. And that is only done when we start paying attention, when we start becoming aware. That's why awareness is extremely important in whatever we are doing.
A high in any state of consciousness above one's customary level of awareness. Therefore, to a person who lives in fear, moving up to courage is a high. To people who live in hopeless apathy, anger is a high. For instance, rioters in third world ghettos. Fear feels at least better than despair, and pride feels far better than fear. Acceptance is much more comfortable than courage. Love makes any lower state seem comparatively unattractive, while joy surpasses all lesser human emotions. Ecstasy is a rarely felt emotion in a class by itself. The most sublime experience of all is the state of infinite peace, so exquisite that it belies all attempts at description.
So again, any higher state is a better state. Now let's say someone is in grief, right? And you poke him and he starts getting very angry. He has raised his level of consciousness, right? So the point is, that's why these levels of consciousness, this chart becomes an important tool for us. So when we start, you will say that, Arey, he's still getting angry. So you'll say, Arey, he's gone crazy. He's not operating at a good state of consciousness. But if he was at grief, if he was in apathy, if he was in shame, and now he started getting angry, it's a growth, it's a good thing. So when we start becoming aware of that, we actually also put ourselves in a state of, we put ourselves into a position where we can actually help and support others to start shifting their states of consciousness. And of course, we need to be aware from where we ourselves are operating, right? Again, koi bhi doodh ka dhula nahi hai. No one is totally pure, right? Even I get angry at times. I get irritated at times. But what has started to happen now is that I'm more consciously aware. So the duration of that anger has started to reduce, and the incidents also have started to reduce. But ultimately, what is the state that we want to aspire to? That we do not get angry at all. We are constantly in that state of love. We are constantly in acceptance. We are constantly in willingness, right? Rather than creating conflict, we are facilitating. That's the states that we want to get to. How many times are we saying no? And how many times are we saying yes? Becomes very, very important in these cases.
The higher the attainment of each of these states, the greater is its power to reprogram the subject's entire life. Just one instant in a very high state can completely change a person's orientation in life, his goals and values. It can be said that the individual who was is no more, and a new person is born out of the experience. Through hard-won progress on a dedicated spiritual path, this is the very mechanism of spiritual evolution.
So, what is spiritual evolution all about? Attempting to experience higher and higher and higher and higher and higher states of consciousness. The more we experience, the more shifts will automatically start happening in our lives. And this is a thumb rule. There was a research done where they actually researched various groups of people, and that research report, that document is also available. And they talked about various aspects of life. And what they ultimately found, that people who had experienced 2 of the 6-day programs at the Monroe Institute, among the groups that they had studied, now I don't know how they got to those groups. I'll have to take out that report and see it once more. But tremendous shifts. took place in the way that they were dealing with life after they had attended 2 programs, right? And I can say this very clearly that in my view, people who experience the excursion and at least engage in those states of consciousness, right, take it a little bit into them, will automatically create shifts in their lives. This is something that after conducting over 100 workshops, I'm seeing the way that people are interacting, the way they are talking, shifts start to happen in them.
The permanent high state experience that may be legitimately attained only through a lifetime of dedicated inner work can, however, be reached temporarily by artificial means. But the balance of nature dictates that to artificially acquire that state without having earned it creates a debt, and the negative imbalance results in negative consequences. The cost of such stolen pleasure is the desperation of addiction. And finally, both the addict and society pay the price.
So, so this is basically being said about chemicals, right? So when you start taking a chemical to take you into that higher state, you need to keep increasing the dosage of the chemical to take you back to that state, because the propensity curve sets in, right? 1 gram of cocaine would take you into a high the first time you do it. It may take you there for the next 10 times, but after that, your body will get used to it. Now it will not take you. So you will have 2 grams. And that's when the problem starts. And then you don't pay attention to your body because you're going into those higher states and you don't really care for your body anymore. Because in the higher states of consciousness, you are not caring for the body. That's what we saw, that above 600, you don't care for the body. So that's what happens to a lot of these addicts, right? They disregard their body, but we have to understand one thing, that the body is the vehicle through which we are operating. So the body is an extremely important part of your life experience. We may want to achieve transcendental states and higher states of consciousness, but the foundation is still the body. So we need to look after the body, right? But addicts, they lose the sense of looking after the body because their care and their association with the body starts to break up. They want to live in that high. That's why in movies also many times you will see they have these opium dens. And I think it was in this, which movie was it in? Yeah, in Doctor Strange, there was a place where he went to, and these people live in that altered reality. So when they come back, they'll just go to the restroom and toilet and then jack in back to go into that high state, because they want to live in that state permanently. They don't want to come back. But ultimately, it is chemically induced. So at some point in time, it would cause, and it would take a toll on the physical body. So this becomes very, very important here.
Ours is a society which idealizes the pleasureless hard work, stoicism, self-sacrifice, restraint, and condemns pleasure in most of its simpler forms, frequently even declaring these illegal. Politicians, whether secular or ecclesiastic, understand this phenomenon well. Part of the standard repertoire of local politicians to gain headlines today is the public announcement of intent to prohibit. Playboy magazines in the prisons, for instance, or deny the inmates tobacco or TV. In our society, unfulfilled promise and enticement are legitimized, but satisfaction is denied. Commercialized sexual allure, for instance, is used to sell products endlessly, but the enjoyment of actual commercial sex is forbidden as immoral.
So again, basically, politicians, advertising companies are using these processes to lure you, right? So a beautiful lady is selling a perfume, you get attracted to the lady, and you experience a high by seeing that lady. But actually indulging in the practice of sex becomes a problem, right? So again, there's a dichotomy here. You want to deny a person something to then give a person something else so that they get into a high and they come into your control. So basically the way that we are living life in the materialistic world is that we are wanting to control each other. So the control drama is constantly being played up, and that is where the challenge and the problem lies. If everyone was looking after the needs of the other, then most of the conflict, strife, all the arguments, all that would have gone. But people, because they want to grab power from the other person, play the game. And we are also part of that game.
Historically, all ruling classes have achieved status and wealth by controlling society through some form of puritanical ethic. The harder underlings work and the more meager their pleasures, the richer will be the ruling system, whether that be a theocracy, aristocracy, oligarchy, or corporate industrial barony. Such power is built upon the forfeited pleasure of workers. Experientially, as we have seen, pleasure is merely high energy. The energies of the masses have been co-opted over the centuries to produce for the overclasses the very wealth of pleasures denied the underclasses.
So basically, what are they talking about here is the propensity curve. If I have so much and then you give me so much, I feel, I have so made it. I've got it, right? But if I have so much and you give me so much, then I will not feel any pleasure whatsoever. So the game is to suppress, to deny. And when we deny and we give a little bit, it gives the high to that person and the person works harder, right? Which results in more wealth for the wealthy. So basically what is happening? You restrict the pleasure so that the high is achieved with little rather than more. And you constantly play that game. The ruling class constantly plays that game.
In truth, the pleasure of the life energy is mankind's basic capital. Robbing man of this has resulted in the wide division between haves and multitudes of have-nots. What working classes envy in the lives of upper classes is appropriately their pleasures, from the pleasures of the exercise of power in its varied forms to the beautiful trophies of self-indulgence. The realization that the pleasures denied oneself are being enjoyed by others begets the outrage of revolution or sublimated the repression of restrictive laws against the pleasures of one's peers.
So basically what is he saying over here? Very important here is that you will take that suppression to a certain extent. Once it goes over the head, then the revolution starts to take place. And then a new society starts to develop. But again, in that society also, there is repression. So even in socialist USSR, it is now seen that there are so many people who were doing so well and they were using a lot of the dachas and this and that, the ruling class was always enjoying more pleasures than the lower classes. So they shifted from the monarchy to communism, but within that also still the hierarchy existed. So you can't get out of this. It's very difficult unless we go into transcendental space and spiritual space. You'll see that most spiritual people don't indulge themselves. They live very simple lives. Okay. And that is the hallmark of spirituality.
The moral code thus functions as a rationalized exploitation of the life energy of the masses through a calculated distortion of values. The illusion proffered is that the more hellish one's life, the more heavenly will be one's reward. This distorted coupling of pleasure with suffering has produced a morally perverse social milieu in which pain becomes associated with pleasure. In this atmosphere, the insane alternation of suffering and euphoria that typifies addiction becomes at least provisionally tenable in a deadly antisocial game of winning and losing the forbidden high.
So, what is happening over here? Pain gets associated with pleasure because the more in pain you are, that little pleasure will automatically give you the high, right? And perversion then sets in. This is also the case with SMN and all these other practices where you actually induce pain. And when the release comes, it automatically creates pleasure in your system, right? That is what, when you're poking the thing, you're going into a high, you're poking, you will not feel the pain. All that stuff will happen. Later on, the pain may come back, but you again take the high and you go back to the high. So pain and pleasure start getting mixed up.
Bhaiya,
yes.
Bhaiya, can you just this thing, the pain and pleasure thing?
So
I mean,
so when you are in pain, right, and you take a painkiller,
right,
and it numbs the pain, what happens?
Yeah, you feel good.
That's it.
But why would you induce pain? No, that's what I don't get.
So when people get addicted to it, they actually induce pain so that they can experience the pleasure.
Induce the pain. Okay.
They induce the pain so that they can experience the pleasure when they transcend the pain.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I've got it. Thank you.
From the same life view arises society's current method of treating the problem by playing the other half of the game, denying the substance of abuse. By doing so, we have created a marketplace that is so highly lucrative and easily entered that a whole criminal industry flourishes as a result, corrupting life on multiple levels. The arrest of a drug kingpin, for instance, has no effect at all on the drug problem. Before he is even jailed, he will have been replaced by a new incarnation. In the recent demise of the South American drug lord Escobar, he was instantly replaced by 3 new kingpins. So the Hydra now had 3 heads instead of 1.
So whenever something is denied, it becomes very attractive, right? So by denying certain things, you're actually making it flourish. Now, for example, now cannabis has started getting legalized in most of the states in America. Now, do you think the value of cannabis is going to be at the high that it used to be? Now, because it is freely available, anyone can grow it in their kitchen garden. The value of cannabis is going to go really down. And when something is normally available, the allure for it also starts to fall, right? So this is what he's saying over here. Because we are denying a certain process to the normal people, it becomes attractive and it commands a higher value. The moment it becomes arm that everyone can access it, it drops in value totally.
Society's drug problem requires a social approach calibrating at 350, and society's current anti-drug program calibrates at only 150. It is therefore ineffective and the money spent on it is wasted.
So now this becomes important, right? This is something that we've spoken before. When you want to achieve anything, when you want to create anything, you can actually calibrate at which level of consciousness will that manifest. Now over here it says that the social problem with drugs needs to be dealt with at the level of 350, but we are dealing with it at the level of 150, which is anger, the war against terrorism, the war against drugs. Where are we coming from? If we want to transcend it, then we need to operate at higher levels of consciousness. Only then can these things get transcended.
Industrial and scientific research. The diagnostic method we have described quickly tracks fruitful areas for research and development in science and industry. Historical examples illustrate how the use of this method of effort and millions of dollars.
So what is he meaning over here? If we can test that which product has a higher level of consciousness, what manifests at a higher level of consciousness, then we can save a lot of money on the research of stuff. Because if it's not going to turn up, then what's the point of researching it? So if I can be intuitively guided in the right way by using any process, this is one of the processes to use, that whether this is taking me on my life path or this is taking me on my life path, then I have a choice at every point in time in my life, right? It makes it easier to make a choice. So when I make a correct choice, I land up at the correct place. I land up at the correct destination. So using this process, it could be possible to save a lot of money and resources. Yes, Aisha?
So that means that what's good for me may not be good for you.
Absolutely right.
So I think a product is bad, but for someone else, it may be fantastic.
It may be.
So this is only a personal calibration. It's not. But now they're saying the drug thing is across the board.
It's across the board. See, certain things will be across the board, and then you can fine tune. Now, something may be good for 90% of the people, but 10% of the people, it may not be good. Right? So you can fine tune for yourself also at the end of the day.
So the bottom line is everything is for ourselves. We cannot thrust our opinion down anyone else's throat that this is right or this person is good or whatever.
Never.
Maybe good for one and not for the other.
101%. So that's why today you did the Vastu workshop, right?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you didn't do it. Okay.
No.
So when we do the Vastu workshop, for example, we say this very clearly that something may work for you, it may not work for another person. Now, one house may be good for Mr. A and it will be totally gone case for Mr. B. One bedroom may be good for Mr. A, it will be totally gone case for Mr. B. One shirt may be really beautiful and take this guy to a higher state of consciousness. And it will take Mr. B into the gutters. So that's where your awareness starts to click in, right? The more aware we can make ourselves, the more tools that we have to be able to test whether something is working for us, whether it is taking us to our destination, whether it is taking us into a higher state of consciousness or not, becomes extremely important. Okay. So any practice which is taking us down or depleting us, there's no point in holding on to it. Just drop it. That's what we are getting from the grid, right? So the grid is a simplistic form of the levels of consciousness that we are talking about in this book. Yeah. Here, the left side is graded. The right side is also graded. So where are you operating from? That's the big question.
Thanks.
Materials research Thomas Edison tested over 1,600 substances before he arrived at tungsten as the most suitable element to be used for his historic development of the incandescent light bulb. An easier way to detect the best material would be to divide the possible alternatives into two groups and ask, the material is in this group, yes or no? After this determination, the group is again subdivided and so on. By this method, an answer can be derived in a matter of minutes rather than years.
Right. So what does this imply? We can test for what will work and then actually work on that. So then we save a lot of time. Like, again, I'm repeating, every time in life, we always have a choice, right? Now, which is the right choice? If I can get a system to be able to determine that, then don't you think our lives will be much better and much more synchronized? We'll be more in the flow, we'll be happier, we'll be more content. So that is the basic game that we need to play. So testing, right, should become a normal thing for you. Is it good for me? Is it taking me to where I need to go? Very simple. These are the questions that you need to ask. Okay, I think we'll stop here. Okay.